በሚዛናዊነት እንዲሁም በአሳታፊነት የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት። በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የህግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳ የሳምንቱ በተጋባዥ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም። ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ፣ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት። የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ። በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም። ህዝባዊ መድረክ። በተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም። እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ። በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቡ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም እናመሰግናለን። ዓላማችን የሐሳብ ማህበረሰብ መፍጠር ነው። የሐሳብ ገበታ።
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is our Ethiopia Today podcast. For today, we have on the table securitization of the Red Sea and access to port and the failed Tanzania negotiation process. And from there, where are we heading in the near future? I have two great guests as usual. On the left, we have Professor Ezekiel Gabisa, a prolific writer and regular commentator on the Ethiopian history, society, and politics, as well as we have Mr. Faisal Roble, who has been writing for as long as I have known him, actually, and he's a regular commentator on the Ethiopian politics, as well as the issues pertaining to the greater Horn of Africa. With that brief introduction, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, on board. And also, I would like to warmly welcome my guests. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Mogus.
All right. So this is the second series of our Ethiopia Today show. We started with Faisal a couple of weeks ago, and it is intended for the public in the Horn of Africa, as well as the policy-making body, particularly the international community, because this agenda of the Red Sea has become one of the hot issues in the region, and for obvious reason. And we'll delve into why the Red Sea and the issue of access to port has become recently such a hot issue in the Horn of Africa. And also, how could you make sense of the failed negotiation between the Oromo Liberation Army and the Ethiopian government a couple of days ago? That said, so let me start with Professor Ezekiel. And I have listened to your views on a couple of occasions before the failed peace process, if you can call it peace process. I chose to call it a negotiation. And afterwards, what would you make sense of why the negotiation failed? Who is responsible? And what implication does it has for the Ethiopian politics as we see it today?
The negotiations failed because the difference in terms of the goals that both sides pursued, the gap, the chasm between the two parties was unbridgeable. The Prosperity Party government believes that they have won the elections of a couple of years ago. Now they have a mandate to rule Ethiopia, to do whatever they want to Ethiopia, to lead it in any direction without any consultation. That means there will be no negotiations about how Ethiopia will be governed, no negotiations about the disagreement, the fundamental disagreement between, in this case, the OLA and the Ethiopian government. The difference is political. The difference is how Oromia should be governed primarily, but also Ethiopia. Whether the current constitution that created the self-governing units in Oromia or elsewhere in Ethiopia is going to continue, or is it going to take the path that the Ethiopian prime minister had charted, which is basically centralizing power and concentrated in the hands of an autocrat in Addis Ababa. I'm sure they deny this. They deny that this is the goal, but the constituting documents of the Prosperity Party and the practice of wielding power, as we have seen over the last 5 years by the Ethiopian prime minister, makes it clear that the goal is, as they say, prosperity, and prosperity requires central planning, centralized politics. That's basically what it is, that if you want to go lead the country to prosperity, whatever that prosperity would mean, that it requires a centralized authority. That was, in a way, the case under the EPRDF government as well. But this is the difference between the two. The Oromo Liberation Front, politically speaking, they believe that the Oromo people and other peoples, nations and nationalities in Ethiopia have not exercised their right to self-determination. That is their human rights. That's also their democratic rights. That's also their constitutional right under the Ethiopian constitution. That has not been exercised ever. And under the Prosperity Party, even the modicum of self-rule in the Oromia region had been eroded. The Prosperity Party believes that that has not happened, that they have a mandate, they can rule in any way they want. So those two positions, political positions, could not be bridged. So fundamentally, that is why the talks collapsed. To the credit of the government, they have moved away from their obstinate position, the entrenched position that they have won the elections. Therefore, there will be no power sharing, no reforming the present system. They have moved from that a little bit, not sufficient, but a little bit. That is, they have agreed to co-opt the OLA, give some of the OLA commanders positions in the military or civilian structure, disband the OLA fighting force, and join the government, basically. Join the government. That is basically what they say, called power sharing. It's not power sharing in any sense of the word. It is basically co-optation and expropriation of the cause of the OLA. So this could not be bridged. Though fundamentally that's the case, but there are also technical issues that actually led to the collapse, and that is what happened. It collapsed because negotiations, in the strict sense of the term, could not proceed in Dar es Salaam.
So that's great, and there is a lot of issues to unpack within your presentation, Professor. And I would like to start with the last point you have made, actually, co-optation. And this is what we read from the press release of the OLA following the collapse of this round of negotiation. So can we, for one thing, what is the difference between transitional arrangement or government and the co-optation? Are they different in terms of their effect? That's one thing, because our audience needs to know. Because there are a lot of people who say confidently that they are basically the same. At the end of the day, they are going to share power. Second, is it not difficult to swallow the talking points of both negotiating party, in this case, the OLA, for granted? Because that's exactly what they said. Don't we need to go beyond and see what were the real causes for the failure of the negotiation?
Well, there were two press releases issued by the OLA. The first one, and I have heard a lot of people mischaracterizing the position of the OLA and the political the offers that they made, a series of inclusive proposals, as they say, inclusive proposals on the future. That should be examined definitely, but people were saying that that was a transitional government. The president of the Oromia region also characterizes as a demand to take over the security apparatus of Oromia. That never happened. And you asked me what's the difference between co-optation and a transitional arrangement. Number one, it's not a transitional government, so distinguishing it from a transitional government in which the existing authority dies out or replaced by another arrangement in which political parties that have interest in the region form a new government, a transitional government. That means there will be a transition from the present state of affairs to something else. I would think to a democratic participation is the goal. That is democratization, or maybe return to the position that Ethiopia had in 2018. That is the goal has been the transition to a democracy, popular participation through free, fair, and competitive elections. So you can say that is basically the goal. The transitional arrangement is to come up with a political settlement in the first place, a political settlement that led to the conflict in the first place. That cannot be obtained, like just a ceasefire. The ceasefire, however desirable it is, a ceasefire alone cannot resolve the problem if you don't get back to the roots and solve the political problems that actually led to the conflict in the first place. So from the OLA perspective, a transitional arrangement begins with recognition of the fact that there should be a political settlement of the fundamental differences between the OLA and the prosperity government in this case, in the case between the two. But the same issues transpired between Tigray and the government, other nations as well. Conflict ensued because of the perception or the goals of the PP regime. So it begins with this idea of recognizing that there should be a political settlement for an enduring peace. If there is no enduring peace, ceasefire, the government could simply declare it, as they did in the north, as they did in the Tigray case. They have a couple of times declared a unilateral ceasefire. They could do that, and the OLA would not shoot back. So there is no really need any for a ceasefire unless the political issues were settled. So it begins with that idea. And the second is a roadmap. Once you recognize and sort out the differences, you will have a roadmap. The government has a mandate for about a couple of years, I think 2.5 years, and it would probably take about 2 years to get back to the path of democratization as well. So it will take time. So the OLA recognizes whatever the election was about when it was held, that the government could continue, but with a clear roadmap, that leads to a free, fair, and competitive elections. And this at the Oromia level. This happens at the Oromia level.
But before that, Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just on that point, before we go to our companelist, Mr. Faisal. Yes, you are right. Then we need a holistic approach, including the roadmap. But procedurally speaking, from a technical point of view, how could you go to settling a political difference, those fundamental differences between the parties, be it at Oromia level or national level, without having the minimalist approach, which is a ceasefire, without having a confidence building? I mean, procedurally, isn't contradictory to start from the top while not laying the foundation for the other subsequent issues.
I can understand the state of mind that peace is required, because no political arrangement can be implemented without ceasefire or some kind of semblance of peace prevailing. That I can understand, but I don't think there is a logic, contradiction of terms in the idea. And I've already said this. The government started the shooting. They say they are the ones that are going to enforce the law. They are the ones that started the war. There will be no need for agreement if the government simply declares a unilateral ceasefire. That could be done. But the OLA has a different, and I don't think the procedure would be fallacious if the government had made a ceasefire, unilateral ceasefire. But the fact of the matter is, there is a fundamental political difference between the two. There is a difference of vision on how Ethiopia or Oromia would be governed. That could be sorted out. And then you can agree on a ceasefire once you have agreed in principle on what the governing is going to look like. You could do that. There is no really set procedure that says a ceasefire is a precondition. There is nothing like that. You could negotiate while still fighting. So that could be done. As far as I'm concerned, the OLA now also left Dar es Salaam saying that we need to go back. We need to go back to the table. But then we need in Ethiopia independent institutions to function, to begin to function in the country. The monopoly of power, the total monopoly of power, the totalitarian approach to governing Ethiopia hasn't worked, and it's not going to work, and it's not going to work in the cause of promoting peace. So they have left the door open a little bit, saying that independent institutions are what we need. Now listen to the echoes of what they're saying. Political settlement, beginning with independent institutions, agreed upon independent institutions, but also they say the efficient utilization of human and natural resources. That means the belief that the Prosperity Party has that the government or the states, the Ethiopian states' military resources, economic resources, institutional resources could be mobilized to fight any political opposition is not going to translate into peace. On this one, everybody agrees. The only difference for all political parties or political forces in Ethiopia is the Prosperity Party believes it has all the resources at its disposal to use in any way that it wants to suppress opposition, to obliterate opposition, just like the Prime Minister himself said in Parliament, that they could suspend the development projects in Ethiopia altogether to fight the political enemies of the Prosperity Party. That, the OLA is saying, that is unacceptable. You don't need to go to Turkey and buy the latest weapons to fight political difference.
But the government, fair to use, but the government said if the national interest or if the Ethiopian interest is challenged, that's what he said. Not the Prosperity Party.
Who defines the national interest?
Yeah, I'm just asking. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, literally, that's what he said. The Prime Minister said if the Ethiopian existence is questioned, then he said they can take any measure, including redirecting the capital budget.
Yeah. You want me to flesh it out? Look, the Ethiopian government says if you go to war with the Tigray opposition, the Ethiopian existence was threatened. That they have been saying. With regard to the OLA or any opposition, or even the Amhara region, if there is a political opposition or difference of opinion, Ethiopian officials translate that as unpatriotism, as picking up arms against the Ethiopian state. All of us love our country. All of us, with all its imperfections, with all its differences, we love our country. There is no monopoly of the PP in terms of loving the country or in terms of being patriotic. But any political difference, any political opposition, the PP interprets as a national interest issue. I mean, there is no national interest that was defined by Parliament. Look, Ethiopia had a national interest in 2002. There was a definition of Ethiopian national interest by Parliament and issued as a policy matter in 2002. Since then, Ethiopia has not defined its national interest in 21 years. In 21 years. That actually collapsed in 2018 with the coming of the PP to power. Who defined the national interest, and who in Ethiopia or elsewhere in the world believes whatever comes out of Abiy Ahmed's mouth is the Ethiopian national interest? Who is going to believe this man after 5 years of lies and treachery? Who is going to believe that he is the one that defines national interest? Here is what the Ethiopian government is doing. For the Prosperity Party, everybody, if the Oromo, this is what the Prime Minister himself says, if the Oromo come to power, Shane cannot rule Amhara. If the Amhara come to power, the Amhara Shane cannot rule Oromia. Who is able to rule Ethiopia? Only him. Only him is the choice that Ethiopia has. If that is the case, for God's sakes, if that is the case, that the only salvation for Ethiopia is him, the source of all conflict so far in the last 5 years is the Prosperity Party. If that is the one that defines national interest and its resources, then we are in trouble, and there is no hope for democratization and difference of opinions and resolving political issues, political means. We're all going to do it through military power.
Thank you for that that insightful explanation of what we are going to pick on. Now I have to include Mr. Faisal into the discussion. What was your reasonable expectation? I would have asked that question to Professor Hiskel, but I will come back to you on the same issue. What was your reasonable expectations from the Tanzania peace process?
Actually, I said this to you last time when we were together. I didn't expect much. Simply because in meetings like this, in mediations and negotiations like this, because the two parties are so far apart, much hope is not to be expected. Such meetings and mediations are not supposed to address or at least resolve the big issues. I never expected that Ola will go to Addis in the coming few weeks. Neither did I expect that there will be a substantial framework of agreement between the two. If at best, I expected that there may be some kind of narrowing the gap in terms of hostilities and cessation of hostility as a beginning. If not that, then some sort of goodwill of departure between the two, but to come back and continue like they did in Zanzibar. And if you recall, I said this to you because of the political and philosophical differences that they have, going back all the way to OLF, Ola's political program, which to many of us is a program that still hasn't scrapped from the books the right of Oromia nation state to be established. I have not seen that yet. That's in the books. As long as you have that, and as long as you have a centrist government like Abiy, who even moved from a sort of like moderate autocratic system to a very dictatorial system now, I never expected that they would resolve the big issues. But however, I think the Ethiopian government went to the table with a condescending attitude towards Ola. You can glean from the aftermath language that Ridwan Hussein used, the way he addressed, the way he called them belligerent groups, and the way he, portrayed as a group that came to the table without goodwill. So I think this is a failure. It's a failure for all the parties, but mainly I would say for the mediators. The mediators that included the United States of America, Mr. Workine, who is IGAD, and AU, who was the oversized person in that negotiation, it tells me that they failed because they have not secured a single positive item from the 8 days plus negotiation and meetings that they had. So, of course, it's a collapse, but I think it's a bad mark on the ones, the EU or Norway, the IGAD group, as well as Mr. Hammer, who was there. Because if I were there, they should have not let the parties depart without at least sending a single positive message from the rooms and the table around which they were. Now what we have zero positive reports coming from the House. We have even the two parties, particularly the federal government of Ethiopia, bad-mouthing its peace partner because few days ago, Ola was a peace partner with the Ethiopian government. Now they are trashing something we have seen always with the federal government. They approach their, their adversaries, but when things don't work the way they wanted, they trash it. They do the same thing to Fana. They are doing the same thing to Ola. So I think Scale touched a very important point in the sense that is the federal government really serious to bring peace back to Ethiopia? That is really the big question. If so, if yes, negotiation is our only icing on the cake. Mediation is our only icing on the cake. If the federal government, which is the originator of famine, which is the originator of war and death and mayhem, because the big card, the ones who has, according to political science theory, monopoly of the word I'm missing, violence.
Yeah.
Mr. Thiele's theory is nothing but the state. The state can stop the war, the state can start the war. And what we see from this is that the Ethiopian federal government is in no way in a hurry to at least silence the Guineas. So it's a collapse. It's a collapse that's also a very dark spot on the ones who were running the negotiation.
All right. So
now, let me just say one thing. I think this is also a challenge for Ola, because is Ola really around here just to come back to the table and ensure that the federal government that has been agreed upon is what they want? If yes, the challenge is, can what happened to ONLF and TPLF also happen to Ola? What are the guards that Ola has, so that Abiy doesn't renege on whatever they agree and do what to Ola what they have done to ONLF? In which case they disarmed and then they brought them to Addis Ababa. And not only didn't they share the power with them at the local level, but they created a sectarian Ogaden National Liberation Front under the auspices of the regional government of the Somali region, and completely included that in the federal parliament as well as in the regional parliament. Is the record that the central government has with the opposition groups that put down their guns is not really something that is to be looked at with a positive light. So what does Ola has as a guarantee that what had happened to ONLF, what had happened to others, will not happen to Ola? I'm not sure if that's part of the discussion, but if I were Ola, I'll put that on the table.
That is a great way of moving into the next issue, and still we have.
If you let me, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, you can add one more thing, and then we'll come back. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. The perception that the Ethiopian government has about monopoly of violence, it's connected to what I was just saying. Now, Ola is at war, and they have demonstrated by sending the commander-in-chief and the deputy all the way to Dar es Salaam, where they had absolutely no control over their own security, to demonstrate to the government, to the facilitators, to Ethiopians, and to the world that they are as committed to making peace with the government as they are committed to ensuring the Oromo people's rights, that they would do it either way, that if there is genuine commitment to peace and making peace, Ola has demonstrated that we go the extra mile of even endangering the security of their top leaders. They have demonstrated to everyone, they say they are as committed to getting to the goal of freedom for the Oromo people and Ethiopian people through negotiations and peacemaking. If that doesn't work, if the Ethiopian government remains obstinate and remains committed to its own view of what power really means, when they will go back to what the status quo ante. But they have demonstrated to everyone that they are also for peace. But this idea, and I really want to say that the idea that the government, whoever is in power, has the right to violence, always people mischaracterize what that is. The Weberian notion of monopoly of violence is actually monopoly of legitimate violence. Not any violence, legitimate violence. That means backed by law, backed by the law. And the state has that right. But from the Ethiopian government, the Prosperity Party's government side, that violence, it says that violence is mine. It's not legitimate violence. Their interpretation, their misreading of the concept of the monopoly of violence is that they are the ones that are entitled to perpetrating violence, and nobody else has the right to rise against tyranny by violence. Where there is violence, it's met with violence. Rebellion against tyranny is one of the rights that the contractees in the social contract that Hobbes envisioned. One right that is not renounced in the political theory that Faisal really talked about is the right to rebellion against tyranny. That's the only thing that you do not renounce. But the Ethiopian government really reads this issue, this idea of political theory, saying that in the state of nature, where there is no society, and which is worst of all, says Hobbes, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man is solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. That is what nudged people into forming a commonwealth of common defense, to a social contract. The government really violates the social contract and raises its sword against anyone, and then expects that others are not also going to rise in rebellion and violence when it also violates the social contract of common defense. That is really at the root, the misreading of the idea of the monopoly of violence, the misperception of the political theory of the monopoly of violence is also at the root of the conflict that is ravaging the country. That is what I wanted to add.
Yeah,
that's great, Professor. That would have been my question, so you already interjected. I still have one question for each of you, but Mr. Faisal, you can go ahead.
No, let me. I think what Tilly talks when he talks about violence, monopoly of violence by the state, is not to really justify the state going around and killing people or robbing their rights to self-determination, what have you. I think what he's saying is that because that state already has the power, that the infrastructure of the state, the police, the army, the military, that is the violence. The Weberian, I agree, that's in legitimacy completely. That's another subject. But I think the government is using even it is a monopoly of the violence. It's that monopoly of the violence is supposed to ensure that the citizens are living in a safe environment, protected, and all the infrastructure of the government is used to maintain peace and security. And it's the only one that's given that right to really, that mandate to own. But when there is a disequilibrium between the legitimacy and the monopoly of violence that the state is giving, then the uprising and the questioning of the legitimacy comes. And I totally agree. I think we have no issue in terms of this government of Abiy Ahmed losing its legitimacy, because no country will claim to have any sort of legitimacy when three of the major states, and now we are talking about 3 states, Tigray, Oromia, and Amara, to the tune of probably 70+ % of the population, having a condition of war. Legitimacy is a luxury that we can even talk about. So that has been eroded. So for Ola to be on the guard when they are going to this negotiation, they are right. The legitimacy that they have towards the government is not the same as the legitimacy that the government feels it has. They are going, but on another, before we move to the
maybe we have also a lot of issues to deal with,
yes,
other than the legitimacy.
Yes.
So you can make your final point.
No,
and we'll
I think as a Faisal, I never really liked it when the top two commanders of Ola went to the conference. I think it was very risky. Yes, it was a good gesture on their part, but knowing the history of the federal government of Ethiopia, I would not have done that. You overexposed the leaders and anything could have happened. It's always also good to protect the image and what the South African scholar call it, the myth of the leaders. I think there is a lot of mythology built around Jan Mero. I think I would have protected that. But the other thing is that the first day I heard that top Ethiopian generals were the lead of the negotiation, I said, this thing is useless. It's not going to work. Because with the all Ogaden National Liberation Front in the 2007, 2010, the Mallas government refused to send diplomats to negotiate with Ogaden National Liberation Front. It will always securitize the issue as opposed to political. And when I heard that the generals were the leading of the first round of the talk, I kind of felt like Addis Ababa is not serious. But later on, Ridwan Hussein and the Attorney General joined, so it looks like they came forward a little bit. So I hope the next time this round, the next third round starts, maybe it will be more appealing to us.
Yeah, I will have one question as an exit on what will come next and why would you propose around the end of our show. So keep that for me. But speaking of legitimacy, yes, I agree with both of you, Professor. From a sociological and a legal point of view, actually, it has three dimensions. One is as the source of the use of violence, which is legitimacy. So where you drive it from, through social contract, that is one mechanism. The other one is the use of the violence itself, the way you use it. You cannot use at will. You cannot use excessively. So there should be a rule of law in place. And then there is an intended purpose, which Mr. Faisal is alluding to. So what are you intending? To what use are you putting the monopoly of violence? So the expansive interpretation of the monopoly of violence has actually three aspects to it. So I agree with you that, and let's move on. And I would like to ask one question of clarification to Professor Hizkel first. The right to self-determination, was it on the table as far as your knowledge is concerned during the negotiation? And if so, wouldn't it be a non-starter for this negotiation if you put the right to self-determination from the very beginning, if that was on the table?
Personally, I don't, because that's a constitutional right in Ethiopia. Why people really demystify this, I don't quite understand. What is wrong with invoking a constitutional right? I don't see that's a problem, but it wasn't. That was not even the issue. That is the goal. The right to self-determination is a constitutional right in Ethiopia. It is the ultimate political right, democratic right enshrined in the Constitution. Why people feel that, I don't quite understand. That's the way how to resolve political differences. But that was not put on the table in Dar es Salaam. That was not the goal. But that was not the political proposition that was put on the table. I wasn't at the table, but looking at what they had put, said one is an inclusive proposal, meaning all political forces in Oromia sit down and hammer out a transitional arrangement for Oromia. But the other thing that Ola put on the table, or at least tabled, was that the political problems that the country is facing, the national problems, economic, political, security, diplomatic, governance, and administrative, all kinds of problems are above the ability or the capacity of both the PP and the OLA. These two alone cannot resolve the problems, the gargantuan problems that Ethiopia is facing. It is beyond the capacity of both. So even if the two agree to a transitional arrangement on how to govern Oromia, which will be born of some kind of a meeting that involves all stakeholders in Oromia, that does not solve the problem in Ethiopia. And if there is still conflict raging around the country, the peace agreement between OLA or a political settlement between the OLA and the Ethiopian government is not going to hold. There is no stability in the sea of instability. So there will be another level of negotiations. So in general, what the OLA was calling for is, let's have a wider discussion. We are all in trouble. We've shed a whole lot of blood. We've killed more than 1 million people in that country because of the conflict. We have decimated the economy. We have made Ethiopia a pariah nation. It is governed by a kakistocratic aristocracy. It's all kinds of problems that governments could face at intervals are all converging in Ethiopia at the same time, on the verge of precipitating a state collapse. So we're all in trouble. So they tabled the idea of, let's do a transitional arrangement, which involves all stakeholders in Oromia, and then work with others also to have a dialogue, a national dialogue that could lead to return to the path of democratization. Proposed. The counter proposal from the government side is, no. We are actually mandated. We have accepted a mandate from our people. We're the ones that are going to lead. There is no problem that should be resolved through any kind of arrangement. And if there is a national dialogue, we have already instituted a national dialogue. There's no need for all of that. All you have to do is for your commanders to join the government. We will give you power. We'll give you positions. We'll give you amenities. And that's what the Ola side rejected. That's why they were unable to come together. Now, on the issue of this issue of the theoretical case of monopoly of violence is, it is about making violence or power unnecessary. That use of power, the power of use is the need to use power becomes unnecessary, which means as Democrats, they were supposed to negotiate, give and take, resolve political differences politically. But that's not the view of the Ethiopian government. That the Ethiopian government has a mandate to rule for the next 2 years or maybe beyond. They're just trying to disperse some powers here and there. So it collapsed. I guess that's what you asked me to.
Yeah. But on the issue of transitional arrangement, we have already touched a lot upon. We discussed a lot about it. But there is nothing wrong with Ola to demand or even to propose, not demanding, to propose that there should be a holistic approach and all-inclusive national dialogue and transitional arrangement such that we can save the state from collapsing. I agree with that. But there is an issue of agency, right? Agency. How could Ola, being only one party to the negotiation, even within Oromia being only part of the problem, ask on behalf of others to have a transitional arrangement? Because that's what I've heard from.
I think I addressed that. Yeah, I already addressed that, saying that that's not what OSA proposed. It says the problems that we face is even beyond the two of us, much less Ola by itself. It says it's beyond us, it's above us, it's beyond our capacity. So let's have all stakeholders. That's what Ola said. Stakeholders, an inclusive process. That's what I already said that. So they did not present themselves as the sole representative of the cause of the Oromo people. They in fact did not say that on the Ethiopian level as well, saying that it's beyond both of us, both Ola and the PP government as well. It's beyond their capacity to resolve it.
That's great. Mr. Faisal, would you like to
No,
interject?
I think Ola is right to say that, to also touch the big focus and the greater issue for Ethiopia, because it's a major political group that's also having the issue of self-determination on the table, not on that table particularly, but as part of the big political agenda for Ethiopia. By the way, even those who signed peace agreement with PP, like over the National Liberation Front, did not move away from their right to self-determination. Actually, they are saying we are still holding self-determination dearly close to their hearts. It's just that they may change the approach and the way they are seeking. So I think if Ola says we are committed to political resolution with the issue of self-determination, and we want other groups also to be part in the future for the discussion of Ethiopia's issues, I think they're right. I think and I would even want other political groups to speak like that, so that they can coalesce together and narrow their program gaps, whatever they have at this point in time. So.
Yes, exactly. Actually, I said from the very beginning, I agree with all what you have said. Even I could go beyond. All I'm saying is there is a voice that came from Tanzania, from the part of the PP, of course. That's exactly me acting as a devil's advocate for further clarification. So thank you, both of you, because that is the exact word they used on Ola's proposition, in addition to what Professor Iskeel said about cooptation and other issues. That said, Mr. Faisal, you said that it was actually a right thing to do from the perspective of Ola, that when the government asked them to do the DDR right away, not even the DDR, just demobilization and encampment, they said categorically no. So can we see that there is a burden of history here, which is for both of you, or the politics of memory at play? I'm referring to what happened to ONLA, of course, but not only that. I'm referring to the OLA itself, to the Oromo Liberation Army in 1993, 1992. What happened to them after that arrangement with transitional arrangement?
Yeah.
So is there a politics of memory playing out here? So this is for both of you.
Yeah, and I will be very brief. I think yes. I think there are nagging issues that have been on the table always for Ethiopia's political groups, whether this is Ola or the National Liberation Front and others, TP. And these issues are issues that really refused to be resolved in a very amicable way by the central government. OLF was there 1991. I recall when they used to have open debate with Mala Zenawi as to how to resolve the Oromo Liberation Front question and the Ogaden National Liberation Front. And ultimately, both of them walked away and went back to the jungle, not because they wanted to continue the war, but because their other side is a negotiator and a partner in peace was not ready to really resolve. Now, after so many years, 30 plus years, we have the same situation. At least Ola has the benefit at this point in time of looking what had happened to their partners and to their comrades. They can see what had happened to Ogaden National Liberation Front. The day they agreed to disarm, they don't even cannot move around in the Somali region, let alone the rest of Ethiopia. They have been so disempowered. People are now debating what they had debated in 1992 and then again 1994 and then beyond. Should we go back again to the jungle or not? That's the debate within the Ogaden National Liberation Front. With Ola, they see this happening. It's not like they don't study what's happening in the Somali regional state. It's not like they're not studying what's happening in Sidama and what is happening in Addis Ababa, which is a government that's no longer interested in broad-based participatory political program. They see a PP that is morphing into an autocratic system. Unless people, Mogus, see that Ola is another Oromo group, PP is like some narrow people say another Oromoma group, therefore the two are joining. That's not the way Ola is looking at the issue. The Ola is looking at Addis Ababa as a merciless dictatorial regime that will spare no one. whether you are an Oromo, Somali, Amara, or Tigray. So I think with that, Ola will always move. It has the benefit of what had happened to others. Others didn't look. Somalis didn't look at what could have happened to others. So with me, Ola has the advantage to look what had happened. It also has the advantage of what's happening to Amara region, which few months ago was an ally. When I say Amara region, Amara Fano and what have you, and the elite, strong ally of the PP party when they were committing genocide or atrocity, if you will. And all I need is to weigh all this before they sign anything on the paper. They need to look at this history and use their memory and let their memory and the practical history on the ground guide them before they really go and take planes to go to Addis Ababa.
So in short, you are saying that was a prudent decision to make. All right, on the same issue, Professor, because you know a lot, you know the history of the 1990s, what really happened. So tell us whether the politics of memory or the burden of history is somehow influences the decision of Ola.
Of course, everybody learns from the past. I'm not sure that it's really a burden, but an emancipatory experience that they're not going to repeat the mistakes that the OLF made twice in the last 30 years. That is, in 1991, the OLF was part of the group that toppled the Derg and put Ethiopia on a federalist democratic path by writing a constitution, adopting a constitution that granted the right of self-determination as an insurance, not as a right that should be eminently exercised, but as an insurance that the Ethiopian state would be reconstituted, not as a state that was really built on violence and conquest, but through self-determination, that willing nations, nationalities, and peoples come together to form a federation, a democratic federation based on the will of the people and the exercise of their democratic rights. That means it was meant to actually strengthen the foundation of the Ethiopian state rather than one that was put together by force, and replaced by one that is actually done by the will of the people. That was in 1991. In 1991, the OLF subscribed to the agreement, went to Ethiopia to join in the building of this decentralized democratic republic, but it was chased out. All kinds of propaganda were mounted against the TPLF, the OLF, by the TPLF-led regime. The OLF was not only chased from the country, but also from around the area. The only place they could go to was Eritrea at that time. So that was the first betrayal, the first grand betrayal for the OLF. The second one is 2018. In 2018, there was again an agreement, not signed, by the way. It was not signed because Lama Magarsa insisted to doubt IPSA. Say that we're brothers. We don't need to sign an agreement. There had about 28 issues that they discussed to say we're brothers. As long as we're brothers, we could go home, and then you have all your rights protected, and the Oromo Liberation Army would be demobilized. The DDR that you mentioned will be, and that will be done by the UNDP and other third parties. That's not what happened. The minute that they became the news government of Abiy Ahmed ensconced itself in power, that's the minute that the trainees in Eritrea were coming to Ethiopia, started branding them as TPLF stooges. And those who came as trainees who were on training in Asmara were put in Ardaita and almost killed at the training camp. That did not work either. So twice they've learned. And the commander-in-chief, Jal Marro, has said, we are a generation that had learned the hard way. So they're not going to accept a third time, to be fooled a third time. Once you're fooled twice, that's enough. But this idea of self-determination, as I just said, they didn't push for it, but they did not abandon it. even I, as an individual, think that Ethiopia will be on a firmer political ground if it is a country of the nations, nationalities, and peoples, a federal democratic republic based on the will of its nations, not one that is simply created by violence, coercion, and conquest. It would have been better. A strong Ethiopia of its nations would be better if people exercised their right to self-determination. But that was an insurance. It was not an eminent right that was going to be exercised anytime soon. But it is a goal. It's the ultimate ambition of not just Ola, but all nations, nationalities in Ethiopia, if given a chance.
So that's great, Professor. For the sake of time, let's move to the next topic. I don't want to add anything on that. We may come back on recent developments in the future if need be. This time around, I would like to start with Mr. Faisal. Mr. Faisal, this issue of the Red Sea and access to port has been there. We have had one of a good panel 3 weeks ago, which actually attracted the attention of even policymakers across the board, including even the Eritreans, even the neighboring countries, for obvious reasons. And we did that in Amharic, of course. So what is the recent development? Do you see some kind of pivoting or change of position from the side of the Ethiopian government, or change of language or strategy? Or do you see the war rhetoric, which we have evaluated 3 weeks ago, is still up in the air? What would you think?
Yeah, I think some changes are there, and I will come back to that, Mogus. If you let me, I will just, there is so much disinformation and false and fake history that surrounds around Ethiopia's access to the sea, the Red Sea. So if you may allow me, I would say that history of access to the sea for Ethiopia offers mixed results. Prior to the advent of imperialism in the region, ancient Aksum kingdoms or even Abyssinian rulers did not have any problem accessing the sea. They accessed both the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. However, in the last 200 years, whether its population was 100,000 or 100 million plus as it is now, the quest for a sea outlet has been a challenging dream. Owning a port has been a challenging dream for Ethiopia. What is the best way for Ethiopia to attain this elusive access to the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and Bab al-Mandeb and the Arabian Gulf is much of interest today as we speak. If Ethiopia's dream to access the sea is for economic reasons, I would argue, Mogus, that diplomacy may be the best way to achieve that. But if it has any imperial ambition, both local and global conditions may not bode well for Ethiopia to own a port by force. The question is therefore whether Ethiopia spends enough resources and energy to seek its access diplomatically as opposed to planning the use of brute force and annexation of territories outside its legal mandate. Now, if you look at the political history of the region, most of us learned and studied the propolis of the Eritrean Sea. And that is really the most ancient time we can go back. That talks about when Greeks and Romans came to that area and they visited, Masawa, Asab, Djibouti, later on to be named French Somaliland, Ras Hafun, Berbera, Zeila. In those days, for Ethiopian kings to import or export was not an issue. It was not through militaristic power. It was always some sort of an arrangement with the people who were there. Now, the time that things change and Ethiopian kings became obsessive about owning a port or the sea outlet is when I think the so-called concept of nation state came, and that came with the Iberian Peninsula's Crusade War. The nation state became something that you have to have and you have to use power. And then we have all the wars, Ahmed Grind, some people, you guys call it, we call it Ahmed Al-Ghazi, which denied Ethiopia and Abyssinia at that time, the access that it would have wanted. Both Tedros and Menelik worked very hard to get the access. Actually, more than anybody, it was Menelik who verbatim went to the European powers to give him an access and an ownership of a port by saying that it was Turkey that was opposing the Ethiopian kings to have access. Now, history also tells us that King Haile Selassie spent political capital as much as he can to also have access and own port, particularly Asab, Musuwa, and Zaila. Finally, with the help of the Allied forces, as we know from history, he succeeded to, at least bring Eritrea in 1954, and then later on 1960s with the abolition of the federal system back to Ethiopia, and Ethiopia permanently owned Asab until recently. Now, from that you can glean history has changed, and although Haile Selassie annexed and abolished the Eritrean federal system and owned Asab and Musuwa, he created another problem. By not getting that in a diplomatic way, he generated the Eritrean nationalistic force to fight all the way to, to regain that and make Ethiopia again a landlocked. Now, all the reason is that, Prime Minister Abiy and his team are suggesting, which is Ethiopia is 120 million people, it can no longer be a landlocked, is not really either scientific or historically supported. Ethiopia has thrived and succeeded economically, diplomatically, by using other parties in a diplomatic manner. See, sometimes people make difference. History comes to us, but people make difference. Ethiopia was at the cusp of losing the AU headquarters with one vote. According to Katama Yifru's memoir, that one vote came from northern Somalia. The Somali delegation, who was divided between voting for Accra, Ghana, and for Addis Ababa, was negotiated in a secret restaurant in Piazza with the well-known Somali nationalist called Abdullahi Isse, who was one of the originators of the Somali Youth League, SYL, and convinced him to give the vote to Ethiopia, because at the end of the day, the two are supposed to live together forever and they will stay together. This history, Mogus, tells us that Ethiopia doesn't have to go to war to enjoy the access of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Actually, as Tipper Nai this morning, which I listened to say, Ethiopia can be in a position where she commands the choice between the Indian Ocean, the ports of Red Sea, and others. 7, 8 ports are near Ethiopia. Now, I think the rhetoric of the war to gain Assab by force seems to be a little bit subsuming and dying. I think the big bang with which Abiy started in the, about 3 weeks ago, where he quoted Ethiopian generals, Ethiopian kings, Ethiopia's historical, cultural, legal ownership of Assab seems to be subsuming. I think sanity is coming back. Several countries are talking to him to say war is not affordable at this point in time. And I think within the Ethiopian elite, from what I'm hearing, that they are telling, some people are saying Abiy's regime will not survive if he starts a war with Eritrea, when all is fighting, when the Fano Amara, who is increasing their troops and power by the day, is also waging war, who may have relationship with Eritrea, the regime may not survive. So I'm hearing that they are pulling back and they are looking the diplomatic side, and that's why they revisited the Berbera agreement. That's why the Ethiopian TV is now talking about Djibouti being the outlet and exit for 95% of Ethiopia's import and export, exit and entry. All these current languages are seem to be moving away. And of course, the Addis Ababa University seminar, which was participated by very capable people, Idris Ibrahim, who is a very seasoned ambassador, literally told in so many words to the Ethiopian government that acquiring a port by force is unthinkable. And as interview that you sent me this morning, which I really appreciated, said, what happens if Ethiopia walks today and seizes Assab? It will probably remain unusable for the foreseeable future, because a port that's under war cannot be utilized. So with that, I hope Addis Ababa will come to sanity and seek access to ports and the sea through diplomatic means, which may offer a better option for her.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. So in your view, you see a kind of some level of sanity, not complete sanity, but backtracking from at least the language they have been using. But then we have to see whether that is the case or not with Professor Hiskel. Professor Hiskel, do you see any war rhetoric over the last few weeks since we have done our first panel discussion? Or do you see an alternative and different paths in the pursuit of access to the port in the Red Sea? Or do you see any securitization of the Red Sea, so to speak?
Indeed, I have. The tone has been kind of toned down. The tone, the braggadocio of the first salvo of Ethiopia's demand to have a port, by the way, to have a port. When the prime minister did it, that the tone has been toned down in a funny way, like the Minister of Transportation coming out and saying, we're going to diversify, we're going to negotiate about Hargeisa. Well, Ethiopia had built a road to Hargeisa before. Ethiopia had 19% of the port before. What the heck he was talking about, I don't understand. As if something new had been started. Otherwise, if the use of the Berbera port had been in the mix from the diversification strategy of the last 30 years, a road was built and then there, in the Lapset also. Now, you asked
again,
about
I'm sorry, just to give you two tips. I'm not interrupting, just information. Just last week, there are two developments. One, the Ministry of Energy and Agriculture, Miss Aisha, and also the State Minister said that having the picture as a background, of course, the Assab port, they say that it doesn't need any captions. The picture needs no captions. That is the minister. That is one development. Then there is another utterance from Major General Bacha, who is the Ethiopian ambassador to Kenya, who said that we need access to the sea and control of the Red Sea. That is his tweets. I'm just giving you two further developments. Whether that makes a difference or that is a confusing messaging, I don't know.
Like I said, the tone has of the conversation or the rhetoric has been reduced, not the content of what Ethiopia is saying. That's actually been clarified. And indeed, I have seen the picture. She's an Afar. The point is, because she is Afar, the port belongs to a point of that picture. Anybody could have done it. But the use of Ms. Aisha, that picture, is to suggest, to telegraph a message that Assab is part of Afar. That's the message. I have seen also the tweet, the X from the person that you mentioned, the one that said that Ethiopia cannot afford to be landlocked. Indeed, I've seen it. I don't know if Ethiopia is landlocked or sea blocked, but I don't quite know. But he'd said that tweet suggests we're not going to be remaining landlocked, is what he meant to say. That also suggests the content hasn't changed. The content of what Ethiopia wants hasn't changed. Number one, the rhetoric was, we need an outlet. The metaphor that the prime minister used was like breathing lung or something like that. Otherwise, we will die. He made it an existential issue. That was latched on economic growth, that we need to extend, the international trade, engaging in international trade. So that was economic. And on that tweet of the official that you just mentioned, he kind of contemptuously dismissed the idea that Ethiopia doesn't need a port to have economic growth. He said, okay, if we have been growing at 2%, now we want at 3%. Simply dismissing the idea that, yes, you can be a landlocked. The point is that we are determined. All of those say that in the content except the rhetoric. But I'll come to the most important issue in just a moment. Now, the economic argument has been set aside. Said we want to grow faster. The historical claim, it doesn't make sense. I think Ethiopia had the historical claim that Ethiopia had ports between 1952 and 1992 based on the United Nations General Assembly resolution that federated Eritrea with Ethiopian crown or Ethiopia's sovereignty. That's when Ethiopia really had maritime sovereignty. That's the word, I think. Maritime sovereignty in the Red Sea littoral. So that would be also the legal basis for Ethiopia's claim that the decision of the United Nations General Assembly in 1950 would be the basis for Ethiopia's legal claim or Ethiopia's claim of access to the sea through international law. Now, that's not, all of that is not important. The historical claim, the economic claim, the security claim, the legal claim, all of that is just to whitewash the issue. Because the government's head, the prime minister, had absolutely made it clear. What he said was, I quote him, is that those who are now criticizing us, when we built a navy, he'd say that when we built a navy, where were they? Didn't they have access to YouTube? In his all contemptuous and sarcastic way, speaking about it. But he said, we built a navy. We've already built a navy, and it's clear that there is no other agenda. They have built a navy, and they have no other agenda. We meant we needed a port. That's his word. We needed a port. The agenda is clear. So let's not talk about economic issues. Let's not talk about historical claim. Let's not talk about Ethiopia's maritime sovereignty. What he wants is a navy. He said it so. I didn't put that word in his mouth. He said it so. He made it absolutely clear. Said we built a navy, not a navy that is going to traverse Ethiopia on land, but we needed a port, is what he's saying. We need a military harbor. That's basically what Ethiopia is looking for. How are you going to get that? Well, the scholars are saying, and I've read some thoughtful commentary on the legal or the reclaiming is the word that they use, reclaiming Ethiopia's maritime sovereignty based on international law. That's one way. But the other way is, are we back? Can you hear me, Faisal?
Yes, I can hear you very well. It's
okay. So I'll continue until it comes back.
Yeah.
So the way to get a seaport or a military port is through maritime sovereignty. Ethiopia needs a land bridge connecting Ethiopia, the Ethiopian territory, to the Red Sea, and that they have made it absolutely clear. All of those indications that we talked about, that makes it clear that the port is not now Barbara, it's not Zayla, it's not Djibouti, it is Assab. For what? For the Navy. So that much has been now cleared. The way they talk about it has now subsided a little bit. The tone has subsided a little bit, but the content and the agenda was actually made crystal clear. how is Ethiopia going to get maritime sovereignty, a port where they could place the Ethiopian Navy? Listen to this. What the Prime Minister is saying is Ethiopia's economy is going to grow by leaps and bounds. Ethiopia is going to be a powerful country, and Ethiopia's interest could be in the seaports of other nations. Maybe India is what he's saying, that we have to protect, he says, we have to protect our expansive interest. Not today, but when Ethiopia becomes a prosperous nation. And I am not really putting words in his mouth. This is what he had expressed, that Ethiopia's national interest is going to extend to the ports of other countries as well. The way that you protect that kind of interest is by having a navy, a powerful navy that could travel the sea lanes, protect Ethiopia's powerful interest in the sea lanes. That's what he's saying, that we're going to grow exponentially. We're going to be one of the two powerful states in the world. And to protect that, we need a navy, is what he is saying. So in terms of content and in terms of what Ethiopia needs, they have clarified. It's not the braggadocio of the first salvo. They have clarified it. What they need is a port where they would place and house the Ethiopian Navy.
All right. I think, Mr. Faisal, do you have any point to add up on what
No.
he has already said?
Yeah.
I know the time is already.
Yes. No, I think, I mean, at this point in time, yeah, there is the rhetoric and then the real preparation for war. And I think we don't see real major preparation for war from Ethiopia to invade Assab, but there is so much enriched rhetoric coming from Addis Ababa, as my colleague said, creating a narrative for Ethiopians to act, to show as if though Abiy and his regime are working in the interests of greater Ethiopia to finally fill the little gap, the missing point for this country, which is owning a port. But everything else he's saying doesn't make sense to me. For instance, you can have a navy as long as that navy is sailing around the international the international seas and outside the east region of each and every nation that owns that is. So there is certain limit that Somalia owns, there's certain limit of the ocean that Djibouti and Eritrea and Kenya and Tanzania own. In the high seas, his navies can, as long as he protects and adheres to international law as to how to sail through international sea, he can do that. He can also have access as a transit, as we talked about this in your last show. There is the access to the sea, which is guaranteed for all nations, But when it comes to port, it's a real estate that's owned by particular countries. The same way Ethiopia owns the GERD, the same way Ethiopia owns the Nile, the same way Ethiopia legally at this point in time owns the Ogaden oil. Nobody's coming to Ethiopia and saying, oh, I want a slice of the Ogaden oil because we are a nation that's now producing so many cars and we are driving so many cars. So we want this oil because it's a national interest to us. That is some of the times you wonder, like, are they really, these people, do they really read and understand how the world works, or they learned and perfected the art of lying to the Ethiopian masses to a point where they can say a donkey is a camel and a camel is a donkey, and Ethiopian people will just clap, including the parliament, including the ministers, including that woman, Afar minister, who is an Afar, who is taking her picture at the Assab. Of course, there was a time Ethiopia, as Scale again said, had a legal mandate on Assab, period. Yes, Haile Selassie, annexed and abolished the Eritrean parliament and created federation. But for a good number of years, Eritrea was a legitimate in the international arena, at the UN, at the bilateral relationships of any other country. Ethiopia was the known legitimate guardian and owner of Assab and Eritrea. But that has changed. The moment that plebiscite and election was taken, and the Ethiopian central government agreed to give the Eritrean people the voice to choose what they want, that ended Ethiopia's claim. Every nation and bilateral recognition that Eritrea got, as well as international recognition that it received, disallows Ethiopia in the international arena to put another claim. Now, if Ethiopia works some kind of arrangement where they work with Eritrea and reclaim that, that's another thing. But in the international, and Ethiopia is not the only one that lost a territory through some sort of, Bangladesh was created in the 70s. There are many. South Sudan, which is a neighbor, was created not too long ago, which is less complex than the Eritrean situation, which had a war of liberation for 40 years. Now, the Ethiopian government really needs to engage an intelligent conversation with its people so that people can make national decision. Is the national decision to invade Eritrea and recapture Assab by force? Who is doing that? Because already Ethiopians made the worst cardinal mistake that God will never forgive them. All of, irrespective of who you are. The massacre of 1 million Ethiopians and atrocities in northern Ethiopia, particularly in Tigray, that will never be erased from the memory of Ethiopia, the same way that feudalism in Ethiopia's memories will not be erased, the same way that Somalis have been annexed in Ethiopia by force, the same way that cannot be erased. There are heavy, heavy weight, Ethiopian, and poverty, of course, that they are carrying on their shoulders. Those are the issues that we need to work on. How can we solve the thing that's in the gabeta at this point in time, to use your word, Mogus? How can you really resolve? How can you really give Ethiopians the right hope to say, yes, we don't have a coast, we don't have a port, but we have examples where economies thrived without having a port. Until recently, Ethiopia was growing to the tune of 10%. What changed, Mogus? What changed between 2012 and now? That Ethiopia says we will be cannibals and we will eat people if we don't get
Yeah,
a
but
port.
then, yeah, exactly. You actually open open the door for a counterfactual question, which would be, yes, if I survived yesterday through suffering and through some kind of resilience, or through some form of intervention from God, that doesn't necessarily mean that I do not need access to the sea today or even tomorrow. So that actually brings us to what Professor Rizkel said before about the legal claim. And I know that was authored by I think Mr. Dejan, who is a PhD candidate at the Seattle University. It was a long commentary anyways, so I'm sure that he read. That's why he commented upon it. In that, he said that the fact that we lost something, we lost that sovereignty over the Red Sea and access to the port doesn't necessarily mean that we lost a legal claim once and for all. So, I mean, the historical analogy or argumentation may not be a perfect way of guarding against the counter argument. That I'm just
let me just
yeah.
I think that's the fake history from my point of view I always see with Ethiopians. I mean, you go back to Menelik, you go back to Tedros, you go back to Haile Selassie, how they were claiming other lands by utilizing this international claim, and Ethiopia has always had outlandish claims. I think claiming or putting a claim on Eritrea, there is only one hook that I see that can probably help Abiy gather momentum within Ethiopia, not internationally, within Ethiopia. And that is a transitional government that was not thinking in the interest of Ethiopia, acted to or accepted for Eritrea to have the plebiscite. That's the only thing, by claiming that it was a transitional government and it didn't have a legitimate. But again, a transitional government that has signed hundreds and hundreds of laws and rules and regulations, including a lot of the rules that Ethiopia uses. I don't know how that can be justified in the international law, but legal scholars will always argue. One thing they cannot argue is the fact that Ethiopia is out there for war. And is that war to recapture Assab? Because Eritrea is not going to give it to take what they have won after 40 years of war and bled profusely with hundreds and thousands of people. So if really Ethiopian scholars try to babysit themselves with legal argument, I would say, just it's a tough situation.
Yeah, but on that point, so we will have a final round after this. I have just one question. Any one of you can respond, but it is for you, Mr. Faisal. The state minister, Mr. Misganu, Ambassador Misganu, said Ethiopia cannot and should not be precluded from the activities on the Red Sea. That's what he said. I'm just quoting him. Don't you think that is a reasonable statement?
That I do think there is some valid point, because the activities of the Red Sea is no longer an issue of economic and national interest. It's a regional security arrangement. And I'm going to be fair to Addis Ababa on this issue. It is not fair to exclude the largest nation on both sides of the Red Sea, all the way to Saudi Arabia, the 120 million country, to be excluded from the future security arrangement of a regional nature. If it was Somalia doing its own security, I can understand. If it is Saudi Arabia doing its own security systems, I can understand. But when it's like just suspend the issue of the sea a little bit. Suppose we talk about an IGAD security region and we exclude Ethiopia. That will not ensure any security for the IGAD region, because you have excluded the largest and most militarized country. Now, the Red Sea activity has no national particular interest except the regional issue. It's a collection of countries around the Red Sea that want to have a common vision as to what to do about the Red Sea. Why do they exclude Ethiopia? Is it because Ethiopia is an ally of the United Arab Emirates? Is it because Ethiopia doesn't have a good relationship with Asmara this time? Because about 9-10 months ago, Ethiopia had an excellent relationship with Saudi Arabia. So because of the nature of daily political change, if one's decided to exclude Ethiopia from its own regional security, I think it has an issue to raise this issue of security and say we will not accept that. And if the minister is talking within that terms, he has a point.
Thank you very much. So in the interest of time, once again, now I will give the chance for Professor Iskil to add any points that he has missed in the previous discussion, if any, and then make a concluding remark, including the way out. When I say the way out, including the further negotiation between the two parties, not about the Red Sea, but about Ola and the PP regime. If you have any remaining hope that peace will be secured in the near future, Professor Iskil.
Well, on the latter issue, they need to go back to the negotiating table. And let me connect it this way to what you characterized accurately as securitization of the Red Sea, the Red Sea littoral. Let me begin with the same quote that you had from the state minister, say that we cannot be excluded from Red Sea affairs or Red Sea activities. That's a fair point. That definitely is a fair point. Ethiopia is not, it's a big country with potentially a large economy, and how the security would be maintained, Ethiopia should be part of that discussion. That is an innocuous statement. You can make that statement at any time, not even in the context of Ethiopia's renewed quest for access to the sea or a port. So that's a fair point. Now, what the discussion at Addis Ababa University was, or the article that you referred to says, is that Ethiopia needs access to the sea, but that should not be obtained through force. He actually derides the prime minister's approach in that first salvo. The writer actually thinks that that was irresponsible, and rightly so, because the reaction that it invoked from the neighboring countries, or even big powers, is that force is not something that you invoke at any time. Even if when you're contemplating to use force to advance your national interests, your national objective, there are times that you talk about it in a legitimate way, that you could invoke your right to self-defense or other legitimate circumstances where the use of force is important. But to gain access to the sea is not really the right way. And that is what the message is from the rest of the world, and that what is actually contained in that article that you mentioned. So what that is counseling, that article is counseling, is abandon at least the rhetoric of using force or any means necessary to obtain force. There is a legal framework. There is a legal framework in which Ethiopia could demand access to the sea under international law. So what that article is suggesting is, let's try the international route, maybe initially before the invocation of the use of force. Responsible, I would say. But I don't think the international route, the international law route, could obtain the goal that the prime minister had articulated. Look, what the prime minister is saying is that Ethiopia is going to be a big power. In answering some of the criticisms that were leveled against the claim, what he said that, look, in our neighborhood, he said, in Djibouti, he said, there are big powers with military bases. And then he said that scares us. When military powers, big powers have bases here around us, it scares us. But for that, not just Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, all the way to South Africa should be scared. What he means is that Ethiopia is going to be competing with big powers, not economically, but militarily, to defend Ethiopia's potential national interest, in which Ethiopia would be an economic powerhouse that should not be simply relegated to a landlocked country status. The size of its population, the prime minister says, and eventually the size of its economy makes it a big player, a big power, playing a big role in international affairs, and you can't do that without a navy. That's basically what he's saying. You can't do that without a navy. I agree with Faisal that you can have a navy on Lake Victoria. You could have a navy on Lake Tana. You don't really need a sea, access to the sea. But the way the prime minister defines Ethiopia's national interest in the future is that Ethiopia is going to be a big power. And if you're a big power, your navy should have a port, a home port where refurbishing, refueling, all kinds of things must be done for a big power, because Ethiopia is going to be a big power. So Ethiopia needs a port leading to high seas and the commercial lanes that Ethiopia is going to command as a big economic power. Not today, but tomorrow, is what he's saying. Second, I think there is also an international or global dimension to this. The United States and European powers seem to have been elbowed out from the affairs of the affairs of controlling or monitoring or watching over like 10% of the annual international trade that passes through the Red Sea. It looks like the Soviet Union, or not so, I'm sorry, the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation has a presence there. China has a presence there, but they're closer to the Red Sea geographically, and they're going to probably grow and challenge Western dominance. The only country that they could count upon to prop it up and to make an ally of the West, which Ethiopia had historically been, is to prop Ethiopia and help Ethiopia achieve the goal of a port by any means. They are not going to raise a legal claim. They're not going to help Ethiopia at the United Nations to get a port. That didn't happen 70 years ago. Ethiopia got access only through a compromise, which is the Eritrean Federation. I don't think they're going to dismantle international law and the architecture of peace and security in the world for Ethiopia to gain access. They will be behind Ethiopia, and they're going to encourage the Ethiopian government to try to get it. Force is going to be necessary, is what I mean, and they're going to help the Ethiopian government in the use of force. Second, there is also a regional or middle power factor in this case. UAE wants to control that area, wants to dominate it. And what they use is diplomacy through finance. The MBZ, the Mohammed bin Zayed, when he visited Ethiopia, that he made that clear to Abiy, is going to be his friend, his brother, his comrade in anything that they do. He will provide the finance that is necessary, but Ethiopia is going to be an UAE, a UAE that is in the regional affairs. So Ethiopia will be a conduit that will promote UAE power in the region. So there is the global level dimension, and there is a regional level dimension, and there is a national level dimension. That is Ethiopia, from Mr. Abiy's perspective, Ethiopia is going to be a big power. International law is not going to assure a port where you could have your navy based.
So Professor, could we characterize this relationship as a partnership with the UAE or some sort of proxy?
No, I just said a conduit. It's not a partnership. You could say a partnership that this is UAE is advancing its own agenda through Ethiopia.
So a kind of proxy. If a war break out, then we can call it, we might categorize it as, characterize it as a proxy war, if a war broke out.
What I'm saying is that there is a global interest to that dimension. There is a regional dimension, and there is the Ethiopian national dimension. These are all intertwined. Yeah. These are all interrelated. So if there is going to be a war, it would be with the acquiescence of the big powers, Western powers, with the encouragement of UAE, also to promote the national interest of Ethiopia as Mr. Prime Minister perceives it. That is not going to be obtained through international law. They will talk about it, but it's not going to work out. So what I am saying is war is imminent in the Horn of Africa.
You know, I don't know if I misunderstood. I don't see any prospect where the big powers will support Ethiopia to get a port by force and by war. I think if behind the scene, if they agree on that, it would be irresponsible. And from all indication is everybody's telling Abiy not to really go into war for the purpose of having a port. I think Abiy is getting confused between, the Djibouti renting out its facilities to big powers versus Ethiopia. Ethiopia can rent a base if they can afford, but the way you utilize a base for military purposes is different the way you utilize a port when it comes to import and export. When you have a base like the US base in Djibouti or the Chinese base in Djibouti, what they can do is very limited and very regulated and very restricted. So if Ethiopia wants to have a base for its navy, it can shop around and look at Somalia, look at Kenya, look at Djibouti, what have you. I think in the final analysis, we have to probably watch out as to how Abiy would digest the so-called legal advice given to him by some Ethiopian legal scholars. But, there has never been an issue for Ethiopia to have access to the high seas. I think the international law is very clear on that. The debate has been port, and can Ethiopia have a port that it doesn't own? And if it tries to do by force, if it tries to gain Assab by force, what would happen? My theory is Ethiopia couldn't hold onto Assab when it was even when Eritreans were a little less than what they are today. Today they are a state, they have allies, they have access to weapons, they have access to money. So it may be a human wave into working for the advantage of Ethiopia, but Eritrea can always be a spoiler for Ethiopia, never to enjoy, even if it uses its human wave, never to enjoy the port of Assab. So in the final analysis, what we see here and what we have been talking about when we raise the issue of Ethiopia's interest in accessing the sea or the port, in my opinion, is nothing more than Abiy's political failure. The country that has 120 million with multinational culture, having 11 million Somalis inside, having even Ismail Umar Gele's relatives coming from Ethiopia, not to mention Ismail himself, he came from Ethiopia, having a significant Eritreans and Tigray people living and being a part of the fabric of the Ethiopian society. For the Ethiopian elite and for Abiy to use war as the only means to have access to the port is a leadership failure. A few years ago, Prime Minister Abiy was talking about, in a pride way, how the Horn of Africa is going to be, united and integrated. That would have given him a chance for the use of port. Now, I'll just throw, the other day I threw one idea which was probably very outlandish and could get some access. Ethiopia looking for the possibility of trade-off. Can it have access peacefully by trading off something else? That's on the table. Can it have a canal opened to some parts of the Red Sea for Ethiopia to construct its own? That's when there is a peace and a good leadership on all sides. I think the last one left for Ethiopia to have access to ports is through regional integration. That's the only way. It cannot justify under the existing international order, nor will it ever have America or India or anybody to support it to have Assad by force. But what it can work, if we get the right leadership, is toward this regional integration where all the IGAD groups share something, whether it is the electric power, the ports, the Ethiopian airlines, other things. See, Ethiopia has the asset of 11 million Somalis who are angry at Ethiopia. How can it ever enjoy Berbera in Djibouti when you have 11 million Somalis who deep inside themselves are enemy to the Ethiopian state? They're not going to make easy for you to access Berbera. Even if you access, there would be a time when that 11 million people majority of them will sabotage you. But if Ethiopia earns the hearts and minds of the 11 million Somalis that buffer Djibouti and both Berbera, then that's an asset. Ethiopia is not working on the assets that it has. It needs to work on the assets. So I will throw the idea of the regional integration as a way for Ethiopia to get out of its bottleneck instead of warring with these groups that will soon or later coalesce. Remember, the weakest point of Ethiopia was when Somalia and Eritrean Liberation Fronts and Oromo Liberation Front and Western Somalia Front, all of them were ganging around the Ethiopian state. That was the weakest point of it. You don't want to recreate that as the Ethiopian state. You want to make sure that these are friendly forces when you are seeking access to the port. And what we have now, we have a leadership that's creating the enemy of everybody, internal groups as well as external groups in the IGAD region. And that will not give, no matter what. I mean, Ethiopia had Kanyao Station in Asmara, in Masawa, Kanyao Station. There were only 3 facilities that America owned on earth that were doing the electronic exchange of information and espionage. One was in Turkey, the other one was in the Philippines, and the other one was in Ethiopia in Kanyao Station. That is how important Ethiopia was for the West. And all that have been smoked by some young revolutionary warriors who raised the issue of Eritrea. don't go into a pattern and into a course that you will never win. If Ethiopia, for instance, teases Zayla for theoretical purposes, for 2-3 years, it may be able to do that, but in the long haul, she's a loser. The same thing with Assab. If it tries to capture Assab by force, it may get some gratification for Abiy and the leadership within the short period of time, but in the long haul, if Eritrean people want to fight it, it's a losing game.
That's great. I think, Professor, I think you are not done with your concluding remark.
Well,
Is that the case?
Yeah, I just wanted to make clear what I just said. Look.
Yeah, but before that, if that is the case, before that, Mr. Faisal, I think the last statement that you made seems regional integration or some form of confederation seems a long overdue. I think we can agree on that. But the path towards that end can be started anytime soon. But I just wanted to highlight that it is a long overdue, and it is going to be, it needs a lot of work. So, Professor, now you can continue from where you stopped.
I think what my friend Faisal is saying is the rational way of promoting Ethiopia's interest in a responsible way. On that point, I agree with you, and that will be another forum where we'll talk about the regional integration. On the issue of Ethiopia's quest for a seaport, the Prime Minister had made it clear what he needs is a navy. I said that at the beginning, quoting the Prime Minister. He said, we have made it clear, the agenda is clear. He needs a navy. Number two, he has written a letter to big powers, and I don't want to go and back reading it, but that by 2030, we're going to be 150 million, the economy will grow, Ethiopia is going to be a great player, and we need a port, is what he said. Based on what the Prime Minister said, is it rational? Is it a responsible way? That's not what I am talking about. And
actually, Professor, again, I'm just quoting because you always raise a very important issue. I'm quoting Ambassador Tibor Nagy, what he just said today. He said, I quote, from a rational point of view, he stressed that element. From a rational point of view, and as a student of international politics, he said, it would be insane for the Prime Minister to resort to the use of force. That's what he said. So that rationality. Can you explain the activities of the Prime Minister as an individual that he is so rational in decision making? I just wanted to add that.
That's basically the point that I am making. How many times are we going to misjudge Abiy that he has actually taken the irrational and irresponsible route? How many times? This I have said on many occasions, that is not the rationality, responsibility, are not the parameters by which you judge the Ethiopian leader. On this one, based on what he said, really, I think what Mr. Tibor Nagy is saying is, as a diplomat, he says that. And I don't think that the United States government is going to come and support the Ethiopian government in his forcible acquisition of a port. I don't think they're going to do that. They will have plausible deniability. That's what statecraft is. They have always done and promoted their own interest by violating international law, but by preserving their plausible deniability. They're not going to come out and say, we support Ethiopia in doing invading Eritrea. They're not going to do that. I am basing my conclusion on the Prime Minister's speeches, and I really don't want to go through all of that. He wants ports. One way to get it is through international law. International law does not support Ethiopia's position at this point in time, and he's going to resort to the use of force. That's what's going to do. Is that the responsible way? If you ask me as an individual, I would say that is the most irresponsible way. I would agree with Faisal, and I'll agree with the Ambassador Tibor Nagy. But based on what he had said and what his wishes are, and knowing this Prime Minister, I think he's going to go for war, and they're making preparations about that. They have already put in place, and the way they're going to do it is not by attacking Assad. It's by going for regime change in Asmara. All of those meetings in Afar, all of those meetings with Eritrean dissidents the merging of three Eritrean dissidents in Ethiopia. That's not simply without having a regime change in mind in Asmara. They're not going to attack on Asaf's side. They're going to assert on the Chesane side, on the Humara side, the Tesane side, and there is a lot of factors in that area. All I'm saying is that based on the history of what we have known the Ethiopian leader is capable of doing, based on the experience that he's never listening to any counsel, any sane counsel, and based on the utterances that he's already made, and by observing what's going on right now, I think he is going to resort to force against the counsel of everybody. And I predict, I could be wrong, and I'm not afraid to be wrong. I predict that there is going to be violence, another conflict in the Horn of Africa.
So let me add one thing on the rationality. I think I agree. This is not a rational. Sorry to jump in, because no rational prime minister or leader would wage a war with another country when he has two more major wars inside. And some people may look the Oromia and Amara wars or Fano wars lightly, but I don't. And I described to you before how those two words are heavy. Now, when we go to the world of the regime change, and I heard some Tigrenya.
Even before that, Mr. Faisal, just one point. There is a saying in international relations and international law that even when war is justified, it should be as a recourse of a last resort, right?
Yeah.
So there are options associated over the issue of access to port. There are other avenues. It is not a last resort. So I just wanted to emphasize that even if you have to wage war, which I do not believe, even if it is justified, then it should be a last resort. And I don't think that we are on the brink of last resort. We haven't even exhausted all means which are peaceful and which can be short of war.
Yes. Yes, and that's why I said initially, if Ketema Yifru, who was prime foreign minister of Ethiopia, could convince the founder of one of the founders of the Somali Youth League, the Greater Somali Party, to vote for him for the OAU to be in Addis Ababa, the current prime minister Demeke Mekonnen should at least do 10% of that work, and do some work, and that tells you personality plays a significant role in diplomacy and political arrangements. But I think coming to the issue of rationality, yes, it's irrational for anybody to even think about war when you have two major wars inside, when poverty is high, when Tigray is still reeling from the destruction and devastation. I mean, we can go on and on how war is not rational for Ethiopia at this point in time. Now, I think with the regime change, that's a fair game. It's countries do sabotage each other if they don't want to wage, as Scale was saying, an open war. Even your friend is behind the scene will say, go ahead and do what you have to do. You have to also be ready for a parallel process to be carried against you. If Abiy thinks that he can do a regime change in Asmara by using some former TPLF and Eritrean dissidents, Isaiah is not going to sleep on a high, tall bed. I think that gives the Amara Fano a chance to also give us the gift of the possibility of a regime change in Addis Ababa. If, which side of the alliance would win, I cannot tell. But if a regime change becomes the role, and the Amara elite with the probably possibility of Ola, because at this point in time, in my opinion, Ethiopians see the Addis Ababa Aret Kilo issue more pressing than the port, because they have lived without port and still thrive, as I said, and still get security. But they have not seen for a longer time an internal war as massive as this is, poverty level this is, especially when the prime minister says, I came from the hitherto dispossessed and disempowered groups like Oromia, and still Oromos being the most suffering group. This is a disarticulation at the max. So with the regime change, I'll invite Prime Minister Abiy to go ahead and do the regime change. But equally, I will wish that President Isaias, with his skillful maneuvering of dissident groups, to also do the same thing with the Amara and the Oromo groups. And potentially, who knows, ONLF is sitting nowadays far on the edge, weighing its options as to where to move. War is always undermine stable states. Already Ethiopia is less stable. And for Abiy to start another major war, it will definitely expedite the downfall of Aret Kilo. When, I cannot tell, but it will weaken him further.
Yeah, I think Arakilo is what Arakilo needs last is maybe waging another war, and we can agree on that. It is not only Ethiopia is not less stable, but rather it is fragile actually. So we have 5 minutes to touch up on the concluding remark. If you have on the issue of resumption of negotiation between Ola and the federal government, and I need to emphasize one point: the issue of good faith. So both of you, who do you think was not in good faith? Because I would like to share with you this tweet or X from the representative of Ola. I think you can see it. So this is from Oda Terbi today. And if you read the last paragraph, it says that our unwavering commitment to peace and dialogue remains unchanged. The door to negotiation is always open, just as it has been for the last 5 years. Because for fairness, I have to present everything as it is. So with that, do you see a possibility of resumption? Of course, they have to resume. Professor Ezekiel have already said that. Of course, we all wish that they have to resume it. But because of the lack of trust and good faith, and what needs to be done, and who do you think was obstructing when it comes to negotiating in good faith?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Okay, let me out of hand dismiss the notion that there was a lack of trust or the absence of trust. I think there is a lot of discourse along that idea, but it's not a matter of trust. It is a simple rhetorical device to not blame both sides. It's not a matter of trust. If they are rational and they really wanted peace, which is necessary for both, there is no need for trust. It's a stupid idea to even say that it is a lack of trust, but it's been propounded because someone had said it. But that's not the issue. The issue is that the Ethiopian government sees itself as invulnerable, inexperienced completely in state affairs, and does not see complications that you see, Faisal. Abiy does not see the complications and the consequences that you see. He does not see that. I do not. There's an American jurist that said, I do not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. In Ethiopian case, these are not statesmen. These are narcissists. They cannot see the complexity, and they don't see consequences. What is happening in Ethiopia is that we have power, and he cannot, Mr. Abiy cannot see sharing power with anybody. He cannot share the limelight. He could not share the limelight, not power. The limelight was Lamma Magarsa with his comrade. He couldn't share the limelight. Why? The insecurity, the narcissism is from within. And if you get some encouragement from regional powers or global powers, secretively albeit, if you get that, if you're not toward that, to eliminate what you can perceive as a threat, he will do anything. So it's not about calculation. It's not about consequences. It's not about international law. It's not about what is possible. It's not even the fact that you need the Ethiopian people behind you to go to war with another country to seek an outlet for Ethiopia. all of that doesn't matter. So why did it fail why did the negotiations in Dar es Salaam fail? Because he does not want to share power with anybody. He doesn't want to share limelight with anybody. That's the problem, and that problem is internal. Therefore, I guess that if he decides to go to war with Eritrea, the reaction could be catastrophic. The reaction could be very different. Eritrea also has its allies. That's not what they're seeing right now. They're not looking at that. So they're going to war. If he's going to go to war, he will probably need the Oromo people united, the Amhara people united. But that's not what he's doing. That's not what he's doing. He thinks that he could do all of this because he has now the Bayraktar 3, the TB3. He has it. Don't you guys listen to him always say that we have this in the Air Force, we have this in that Air Force? All right. So he would, who I blame, I mean, you just read from Oda Turbi, they said that the negotiation is still open. But the idea that you could give them power and money and any other opponents, or you could simply annihilate them by using brute force, that's not going to work. I am sorry for my country, for Ethiopia, that all of what is happening, the trends that I'm watching are not really boding for well for the country's stability and peace.
I ask you, so do you see a possibility of resumption of talks? Very short answer. Any hope?
I think that's what I said. That's what I said is as long as he is the one that is negotiating, the possibility of peace is impossible. It's not the lack of trust. It's a matter of pragmatism. It's a matter of pragmatism, not to have a fighting in your hands, in your back, while you are forging toward another war. It's irrationality in the absurd form. As long as he is there and he is haunted by fear of losing power, I don't think there is any resolution of the conflict through negotiations.
Yeah. So as realists, political realists say, the fear of losing power may end up in losing everything. You know, there is that saying. So yes. with that, Mr. Faisal, your last word for today, your last message, or anything you would like to add?
I think I didn't, as I said, I didn't expect much from this meeting because I do see the philosophical difference between the two parties. I think Ola went there with serious issues, democratization, potential course for, no power sharing with them and with the rest, changing the course of history in which the country is now traveling. For 5 years that they have been in the jungle, they have seen a lot of death and mayhem. So they wanted the status quo to show change, if not change right now, but to promise the change. The Abiy team went there to just tell, as Scale said, to just tell Ola, come back home. We'll try to give you villas and what have you, and things. They did not go there with a serious note. And with that, I think the philosophy of difference is that Addis Ababa doesn't see anything wrong in the system of government that it's now leading. Abiy is claiming that he's he has been elected, democratic election has been conducted, and nobody can question. We are saying a majority of, whether he likes that or not, a majority of Ethiopians from the up north to the east don't have any faith in this government. So with that, the only tool that's left for him to govern is brute force, whether it is organized groups, political activists, journalists, civilians. A brute force is the means that he's now using, and nobody can stop that until, and this would be my departing, until Abiy sees the reality that he is not cashing on the difference between, say, the Oromo and Amara elite. In the last war with the Tigray, Abiy cashed and took that to the bank by capitalizing on the schism between the Amara and Tigray elite. That was open, the debate and the narrative and the opposition from the different groups, to a point where one group openly endorsed the atrocities against Tigray. I think what he now counts on is the schism between the Amara Fano warring factions and the Ola. Abiy will not have slept one night in a peaceful mind, if he sees the light of the Oromo forces and the Amara forces coming together, even on minimum program, let's suspend big issues, but to just deal with the devil that's now at Kilo, the day he sees that taking place, either he will change course or he will talk very seriously to the Gurubis. I believe and I endorse the fact that Abiy team went to Tanzania with less seriousness, where Ola really wanted to bring the mayhem against its people, at least to a minimum level. And we had the difference and the talks collapsed. I hope, like Scale said, that the talks will come. And I think Fano Gurubis also need to take lesson from what had happened in Tigray, where the hostility of secession has taken place, but nothing beyond that. They need also to take a lesson from the Ola talks, where things were not serious on the part of the government. So if they get the chance, they need to really come with a very serious program to the table and make sure that they don't just give up slowly or quickly like the Ogaden National Liberation Front did, which, to my dismay, they haven't even signed a clear document with the PP. And now they are really like grabbing as to what to do next. And with that, I will stop here and thank you very much.
I thank you very much as well. Professor Iskel, if you don't have anything to add on this, I would like to thank you. I would like to thank everyone who tuned in today. It was such a nice discussion. I can see that everybody was almost happy. So this is the first of its kind where we have a panel discussion in English with these two gentlemen. And I hope we have dissected both issues, the issue of securitization of the Red Sea and access to port, and the reason why the Tanzania negotiation has faltered. But I really want to end with a glimpse of hope that both parties have to resume the talk, and with all the points, the issues that both panelists have pointed out. And negotiation in good faith, that is the language we use, but Professor Skelaf already made his point on that. So with that, thank you very much, and we shall continue our panel from time to time. And thank you everybody for joining us. Have a good day, have a good night, and see you soon. Thank you.
የሐሳብ ገበታ ሐሳብ ያለ ልዩነት ሚዛናዊነት እንዲሁም በአሳታፊነት የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት። በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የህግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳም የሳምንቱ በተጋባዥ ማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ፣ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት፣ የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ፣ በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም፣ ህዝባዊ መድረክ፣ በተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም። እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ፣ በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቡ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም